Hey, sweetie, welcome to Cuddle Cub's Bedtime Stories, where the stars twinkle and bedtime stories come alive. Snuggle up and get cozy as we journey through magical lands and meet gentle friends who are all getting ready for a good night's sleep. Are you ready for a magical sleep? Let's start our story. Moonlit Mates of Whispering Woods. As the sun sets behind the whispering woods, the forest begins to hum with the quiet activity of its nighttime residents. Tonight, let's tiptoe through the forest, meeting our animal friends and learning fun facts about their lives. Hello, Mr. Fox. First, we encounter Mr. Fox with his bright orange fur and cunning eyes. He lives in a cozy den underground where he stays warm and safe. Mr. Fox is a clever hunter, searching for mice and berries at dusk. Good night, Mr. Fox, we whisper as he curls up in his den. Good night, Mr. Fox. Hello, Mrs. Rabbit. Next, we hop along to Mrs. Rabbit and her fluffy family. They live in a burrow, a network of tunnels, where they feel secure from predators. Mrs. Rabbit loves to munch on grass and clover, and she teaches her bunnies to nibble quietly under the moonlight. Good night, Mrs. Rabbit, we say, as they snuggle together. Good night, Mrs. Rabbit. Hello, Mr. Squirrel. High up in the oak tree, Mr. Squirrel is busy hiding acorns. He lives in a nest called a dray, made from twigs and leaves. Mr. Squirrel is very active during the day and uses his bushy tail for balance as he leaps between branches. Good night, Mr. Squirrel, we call, as he disappears into his leafy home. Good night, Mr. Squirrel. Hello, Miss Owl. In the hollow of an old tree, Miss Owl prepares for her night. Owls like Miss Owl don't build their own nests. They find quiet spots like tree hollows or abandoned nests. Miss Owl feeds on insects and small mammals, which she hunts with her excellent night vision. Good night, Miss Owl, we say, as she spreads her wings for the night's patrol. Good night, Miss Owl. Hello, Mr. Deer. Near the stream, Mr. Deer and his family graze peacefully. They live in the open forest, where they can find plenty of grass and leaves to eat. Mr. Deer is very swift and uses his long legs to escape from threats. As he settles down with his family, we gently say, Good night, Mr. Deer. Hello, Mrs. Hedgehog. Under a bush, Mrs. Hedgehog rustles through the leaves. She makes her home here, where she can curl up safely into a ball if threatened. Mrs. Hedgehog loves eating insects, which she finds by sniffing around the forest floor at night. Good night, Mrs. Hedgehog, we smile as she yawns. Good night, Mrs. Hedgehog. Hello, Mr. Badger. We find Mr. Badger in a large set, a tunnel system he digs with his strong claws. Badgers are nocturnal and spend their nights foraging for food like earthworms and plant bulbs. Mr. Badger has a striking black and white face, which helps him blend into the night shadows. Good night, Mr. Badger, we say, leaving him to his explorations. Good night, Mr. Badger. Hello, Mrs. Beaver. By the riverbank, Mrs. Beaver works hard on her dam, a structure built from logs and mud. Beavers like Mrs. Beaver create these dams to create deep, still water to protect against predators. She enjoys eating the soft bark and leaves. "Good night, Mrs. Beaver," we call, as she pats down the last twig. "Good night, Mrs. Beaver." "Hello, Miss Chipmunk." Last, we meet Miss Chipmunk, darting around collecting seeds. She lives in a burrow, with many tunnels and exits for quick escapes. Miss Chipmunk stores food in her cheeks to take back to her burrow. "Good night, Miss Chipmunk," we giggle as she scurries away. "Good night, Miss Chipmunk." As the moon rises high over whispering woods, each forest friend settles into their home, from underground burrows to leafy nests. They all live together in this wonderful, bustling forest, each playing a unique part in the forest's life. Good night, forest friends. Good night, little explorer. Dream of the forest's quiet whispers and the tales of its creatures. Sleep snugly, wrapped in the soft blanket of night.